Welcome to all my friends, camera and coffee enthusiasts. Welcome to another Camera Cafe. I'm your host, Scott Allen Miller. Today, we're going to be talking about my favorite all-time bridge camera, the Panasonic Lumix FZ300. This is a really interesting camera, and it's kind of a sad day for me. And today we're recording on the GoPro 11. I don't normally do the show on that camera. It's a little bit of an action camera. It's not really meant for this, but because I had to do some quick filming, and I'll explain in a minute, we wanted to use it today. All right, so why is it a sad day? Well, it's always a sad day when you're giving up an old camera. And today, one of my beloved friends, this Panasonic Lumix, is going to a friend of mine, and she will take care of it and cherish it and love it, and her children want to learn photography, and so this is the perfect tool. And it's one that I'm no longer using, so it's a good thing for me to give it up. Otherwise, it's going to sit in my bins and collect dust as it already has, and is no longer going to be useful. Now, this is a bridge camera. Many of you are familiar, but just to fill you in on exactly what this camera is, this was made in 2015. This is the replacement for the FZ200, so this is not a new camera per se, and even the sensor was not new. It's the same sensor as the FZ200 that came before it, but it has a new image processor. It's a bit more powerful, but has the same lens. This is a fantastic bridge camera. If you're looking for a bridge camera, they actually sell this new today. I would not recommend buying this new. It's about $450 new from Amazon. That's absurd, honestly. I bought this one in 2016. We got it because we needed it to record a conference, and a photographer friend of mine, Maggie, said, oh, you've got to get the FZ300. It is perfect for your needs, and so that's why I got it, and I ended up really getting, in a lot of ways, back into photography because of this camera. My main workhorse camera all through that era was still my Nikon D90 DSLR. This is a bridge camera, so it's a mirrorless style with a non-interchangeable lens. But both are 12 megapixels, so this is not a high megapixel. My D90, though, is an APS-C sensor, or Nikon DX sensor, much, much larger than this, which is a 1/2.3-inch sensor, the smallest reasonable sensor you can get in any kind of camera. So this is a tiny sensor, but that tiny sensor means lower price, lower weight. This is honestly a very small camera when I tell you what lens is on here. Now remember, not interchangeable. This is a permanently affixed zoom lens, but it goes from 25 to 600 millimeter equivalent in full frame. Right, so not super wide, which is one of the reasons that I don't find it as useful. Doing vlogging with this is very, very difficult. You're going to have to hold it really far away, and it's quite awkward for that. It's just not built, but it does have a full articulating flippy screen. Like this is very, very usable, and it's got the viewfinder. So lots of functionality, but that zoom range is amazing. You go from a moderate wide to an incredibly long, all on a fixed f2.8. Really, really great lens in this. This is a Leica lens that was designed in conjunction here. You can kind of see in there. I always keep a filter on there. And the lens hood. So this camera is very versatile, very. It does 4K video, does 8 megapixel screen grabs from 4K, and 12 megapixel photos. Very capable. And if you want to see my work that I did with this, obviously I've done conference shooting with it and some things like that and actually the reason that we bought it was because it was cheaper to buy new equipment than to fly in the equipment of the film crew, because they were flying in. We were filming in New York, but the crew was coming from Panama, and it was literally cheaper to just buy new equipment and cheaper to hire a crew from Panama. And so that's how we ended up with this initially, and then I used it as a camera for me for quite some time. But again, my photo work was always on the Nikon. This was really my video workhorse, and it did a fantastic job for that. If you're looking, and you can get this used for a camera that's going to give you some flexibility, allow you to have a really good fast lens and do a lot of different ranges of focal lengths for a low price at high quality 4K. This is a good option if you get a good price on it. Again, $450 would be crazy. It is showing its age at this point, and it is supposed to be a weather sealed camera, and it has been through a lot, which I'll explain in a second, but I've definitely experienced issues with the weather sealing not being the best. Now for the images, I've never had a problem. So that part seems to be pretty weather sealed. Where I run into issues is the controls are actually starting to no longer respond. And so doing things like zooming in and out often is incredibly slow, and it many times doesn't even respond. And so I have to really work at it. So that's not functional for me when using it as a full video camera. I do too much work. I need to have something that is a bit higher end. If the controls worked on this, I would still use it from time to time. I do have some examples of work. So with all my photos, if you're ever interested in my photography, I have everything I do is on Flickr. It's Flickr/Sheepguarding Llama. Old name that I've kept, but that is also the name of my vlog, sheepguardingllama.com, and of my blog, I should say. And I have over 45,000 images on there of all types. I'm a member of all the Lumix FZ300 groups. You can go in there and see a lot of my work, or just look through my photos. But I have done, obviously, many photos with this camera, but I don't find that its performance for photography was that great. Of course, with that tiny sensor, you wouldn't, but the lens really is quite formidable on this, and the range is unbeatable. So that's its selling point. Its range at the f2.8 is fantastic. But before you get outrageously excited and run out and grab this because you hear f2.8, which is quite fast, this is a 1/2.3-inch sensor, absolutely tiny sensor. So that f2.8 is absolutely fast. You can get low light images without too much problem. The ISO performance on this is nothing to write home about, so that's not a big selling point. But that fast lens does mean that you can get some decent pictures in reasonably low light, but what you're not going to get is a lot of background separation. Because that sensor is so small, I'm not going to do the math today, but that f2.8 actually results in a fairly wide depth of field, and you're just not going to be able to get those super blurry backgrounds. Maybe at 600 millimeters, of course, anything at 600 millimeters, you're going to get some background blur. But in general, this is a everything's in focus kind of camera just because the sensor is so small. This is a similar sensor size to the GoPro, for example, which it functions on not so wide of an aperture, but it does depend on that really deep depth of field to make images able to be created without having the ability to focus. Overall, and this does have very short recording limits. You get less than 30 minutes. I believe it's like 25 minutes. It really is short. For the kind of work I do, it's quite problematic. For a lot of people, it's not a big deal depending on what you're doing. So we talked about my photographies on Flickr. You can go see examples of this or any other camera that I work with. But my video work with this, I have two really key examples should you want to go check them out. And I've done quite a bit with this. This was my video workhorse for getting into video editing, into travel videos and that kind of stuff. I've worked with GoPro for a long time, so I have a lot of that too, but the Lumix has the majority of my work. And the two places, I have a channel called Take Flight with Scott, also on YouTube. Currently, there's only one series on there. There will be more in the future, but the current series is called Grand Tour 2, or GT2, which is a 2019 trip that I did for a month and a half with my nieces and my wife. We went to Europe and did a bunch of time in Greece, Italy, Spain, France, Switzerland, and during that time, I did a bit of filming. This is the only camera I took with me, so it was a very special trip. That this was all about the Lumix. And I filmed kind of at random this trip, and I've created so far about 10 videos from that trip. They're mostly about 6 to 8 minutes. If you want to go check those out, you can see what I did with this camera. And a lot of it was learning for me. I had done shooting indoors for conference events using this, and I had done some photography and some very light stuff, but that trip is the first time that I really used it for video in a serious way. And at that point, I didn't know how I was going to use it. I was just collecting footage for that trip, and but I knew I wanted to have video. So otherwise I would have taken the Nikon. Just to prepare for that trip, I did a bunch of photo shoots with the Nikon D90. I was choosing that over this camera for photography at that time. Far better camera, even though they're both 12 megapixels. Plus I have better lenses on that. But this came with us because it was going to be able to do video and photography. So I did thousands, I think about 6,000 photos from this camera on that trip, All of my most popular photos, or nearly all of them, are from this camera. If you go on Flickr, I have millions, tens of millions of views of my work with this camera. So it definitely did a really good job on that trip, but now I simply use better cameras now. Even my Olympus EPL9 will blow this away, and I prefer using it a lot, so that's important. But for video, all of those early episodes, everything in the GT2 series is shot with this camera in 4K, and I think it gives a really good idea of what this can do. And it does, we have some beautiful stuff. Also shot primarily, but not completely, with this is the first episode, and only the first episode, of This is Nicaragua. So if you want to go check out that channel, which is new, there's only one video up currently. We do a tour of Laguna de Apoyo, and the majority of that is shot with this camera. There are some shots that I think look better, and those are shot with, in some cases, a GoPro, and in some cases with the EPL9. And so you can see a little bit of color difference. It was difficult to color match between them. There is a different feel, a little bit more depth of, more shallow depth of field from the EPL9, but still the majority of that filmed with this. I did not have my EM1 Mark II yet at the time that I filmed that. So those are about 11 YouTube episodes that you can watch and see my work of video using this camera and get a feel for what it's able to do. And I think it's pretty enjoyable. So if you're looking for especially a slightly classic but 100% still usable bridge camera used at a good price, this Lumix FZ300 is pretty amazing. And in a way, this is kind of a video less to tell you about this camera and more to provide a memory of a camera that I'm giving up, that I loved a lot, that I spent a lot of time with, and think was an important part of my photo and video journey. But I'm certainly moving on and working with newer cameras now, and it doesn't make sense for me to collect every camera that I've ever used. While tempting and fun to have, like, it's just, you start becoming a collector, and that has risks of its own. I do want to keep a certain number of cameras that I find really interesting or important, that produce really unique images. This doesn't fall into that category. This is a workhorse, especially for video. It's flexible and a really great educational and learning tool. That's why I'm passing it on to the next generation. It's time for me to work with other cameras. And honestly, I have not used this for almost 2 years. We brought it here. I live in Nicaragua. We moved here 2 years ago, and I brought it with me. And at that time, it and my D90 were my main cameras. Since that time, I've replaced this with the Olympus EM1 Mark II and the EPL9, and I replaced the D90 with the D3500. So in both cases, I've made huge leaps forward, and this just doesn't fit into my arsenal anymore. And so that is why I'm giving it up, but I do cherish it. And cameras as tools, I think, become an important part of our memories. Maybe less if you do a lot of work professionally, but if you are a traveler like me, you tend to associate your camera gear with places you've been, or trips that you've taken, or events that you've been involved in, and they become kind of nostalgic. And so it can be difficult to give them up. But they're also technological tools, and in some cases they're going to get old and no longer be something you're going to use, and so it becomes important sometimes to pass them on, whether you're going to an MPB or a KEH and selling them so that someone can purchase them, or you're giving them away or whatever, but moving them on to other photographers sometimes is just what we need to do. Thanks for joining me today. If you'd like to support this channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. Please check out my other work. I do a lot of other channels on YouTube, including Drive Warp, where I show highways in hyperlapse, my vlog, the Scott Allen Miller vlog, where I mostly talk about my life living in Nicaragua and travel, and Take Flight with Scott, where I do kind of random travel videos with music, all kinds of different things. I'd love to have you join me in all those. Please remember to like and subscribe, share where you can. See all of you next time.